Hey guys, welcome to Nespresso Editions episode 8. My name is Matt Adlard and I'm so excited to be here because today we've got a treat for you guys. I'm going to teach you how to make these beautiful almond and orange layer cakes with a praline cremo. I mean, it's elegant, guys. It's festive and it's a great treat for you and your family for this holiday. So, like I said, my name is Matt Adlard. I am a self-taught pastry chef. I'm a judge on TV occasionally, and I love to make wild, colourful creations that are typically quite difficult. I like to challenge myself because I'm self-taught, and I'm based about 2 hours outside of London, a little town called Norwich, and I've been lucky enough to be an ambassador for Nespresso for about a year now here in the UK, and I've been asked by Nespresso to take on this Nespresso Editions challenge inspired by the Nespresso Festive collection. So there's some beautiful capsules that I've luckily had my hands on for a little while, and this month I got to use the Pecan Biscotti capsule to inspire my dessert. So the Pecan Biscotti, you know, Biscotti is that classic Italian, that classic Italian little biscuit that you would have with a coffee. So I wanted something that worked really well with those marzipan notes. So I went for a little bit of almond in the sponge, and then I kind of went down the citrus or spice route. I couldn't really pick which one I wanted, so I went for the citrus. We went for some nice orange zest in there, and then to complement it with more nuts, we've got the Hazelnut Praline cremo, and we've got a chocolate coating on the outside. It's delicious, honestly. I can't wait for you guys to make this. So this is kind of inspired by a few different things. Obviously, we didn't get to travel much this year, did we? Unfortunately. So I was planning to go to Paris during the Christmas period. That was going to be my treat for myself just before the Christmas break. I didn't get to go. So I thought I would take a very classic French recipe, which is this kind of layered gâteau cake almost with hazelnut praline, which again, very classic to use in France. So I wanted to use that Parisian inspiration in my dessert to go along with the Pecan Biscotti capsule. So we're going to get on with the recipe because we've got a lot of elements to make today, guys. I'm very excited. The full recipe is going to be up on Nespresso.com. So we're going to start with the Jackhammer Sponge. Okay, we're going to use a little bit of French here. The Jackhammer Sponge, which is this lovely little sponge here. So you can see that nice sponge in there, which we're going to flavour with a little bit of orange zest. We're going to use some ground almonds. And it's a very light sponge, very versatile. So when you're using it in layer cakes, you're using it in little layer desserts like this, it is the perfect sponge recipe. It's pretty easy to pull together. I've got some ground almonds in my bowl here. You can buy blanched almonds and you can blitz them up and you can make ground almonds yourself, or you can buy them. So we're going to add that into a large bowl. Just tip those in. And then on top of that, we're going to add some flour and some icing sugar. So powdered sugar. And what's really important whenever you're working with flour or icing sugar is to sift it, because sometimes it's a little bit lumpy. I keep my flour in my cupboard. So we're just going to pass it through the sieve. Tap, tap, tap. Just to get it all in there. And you'll see there's a couple lumps at the ends, which we can kind of ignore, but you can use your hand just to press it through as well. But like that, we don't really want that in our sponge because those hard bits of icing sugar aren't really going to dissolve. So just get rid of those, and we're going to put that to one side. So this sponge works really well with lemon zest, but we're going to use orange because I think orange and biscotti is very classic. So we're just going to use a microplane here, just to zest an orange. This is a pretty big orange, so I don't need all of this. Depending on how big your orange is, you only need half, I would say. We're going to go for half, and you should be left with that lovely orange zest. It smells really fragrant. It smells amazing. We're going to tap it into our bowl. And then we've pretty much got all of our dry ingredients in there. And on top of that, we're going to add our eggs. I've got whole eggs here. It's about 3 large eggs. If you want to be really precise, you can weigh them, and it's about 190 grams if you're going to be very precise. And all we're going to do is we're going to whisk that together. And it's going to form quite a thick batter. So right now, this will be very stodgy. You can also do this in a blender. If you've got a big blender, you could just throw those ingredients in, blend it up, and get it really nice and smooth. So that's kind of what we're looking for. It looks like a citrus porridge. Okay, you could say it looks like porridge, but don't worry, we're not making porridge. It's going to taste a lot better than porridge. So I'm just going to tap that off, and we're going to set it to one side. I'm going to get on with the meringue. So a Jackhammer Sponge How's my French, guys? You've got to let me know in the comments how I'm doing with my French. A Jackhammer Sponge is lightened with a meringue. So it's a simple French meringue. So we've got a thick, heavy, we're going to call it the porridge base, and we're going to lighten it with a French meringue. So in here, I've got egg whites. They're at room temperature, so I just cracked them a little bit earlier. And I'm going to use a stand mixer because I'm lazy, and I have lots of stand mixers. The key when you're making a meringue is you don't want to start too fast because a meringue is going to rise in the oven. If you whip it up too quickly, you're going to add too much air into the batter. It's going to get very bubbly, and that means that when you go to bake your cake, you're going to have all these air pockets that are bursting. So we want to start on a very medium-low speed, and we just want to get small air bubbles, okay? Once it's frothy, we've got small air bubbles, which you'll see in a second, then we'll start adding our sugar. But just start that on like a medium-low speed until it's nice and frothy. It's just a good secret whenever you're making a meringue. I'm just going to quickly melt some butter as well, so I've got a little bit of unsalted butter here. I'm going to throw that on a hob, just to melt that down. One of the questions though that I know is going to come through is what kind of nuts we can use, because obviously we've got almonds in this, which is very typical for a Jackhammer Sponge, but you can use ground hazelnuts if you want to use ground hazelnuts. That works really well, but the reason we use nuts is because nuts have a natural oil in them which keeps the sponge very soft. So it's important to use a nut, like an almond, like a hazelnut, so that when it does bake, it still comes out really nice and soft and flexible. So you can change those nuts, you can switch it around and make a hazelnut Jackhammer Sponge. Just get creative with what you've got. So let's have a little peek at these egg whites very quickly. You can see that there's small bubbles, there's very small bubbles, but it's not quite there yet. So I'm just going to kick the speed up just a touch, just so that you're not standing watching me making a meringue.
So, we've got a lot of questions in relation to the coffee. In particular, what is your favourite coffee to go with this dessert?
Okay, that's tough because we had a few different capsules to choose from. So there was the Pecan Biscotti capsule, which is this one, which by the way, the design on these is beautiful. Okay, just looking at it is impressive, and then when you taste it, it tastes good. But you've also got the amaretti flavour, which is this one here. I'm going to pop the box open. I've got a fresh box, which so I can show you. Which is that. Again, very like Aztec design, I really like that. And then there's also the Il Cafe capsule. So I went for Pecan Biscotti because we're using almonds in the sponge. I wanted that kind of classic almond biscotti marzipan flavour to pair with the almonds. But really, any of these coffees is going to work well with pastry because they're all delicious, they're all flavourful, they're all festive, and because we've got those festive citrus notes in there, it's all going to taste good. It's coffee, it's cake. It's going to be lovely.
Lots of agreement with you.
Lots of agreement. So here we go. Take a little peek at this. Can you see? I'm going to stop it actually. Can you see we've got small bubbles? Okay, we've got very small bubbles. That's the point we're going to start adding our sugar. So I'm going to go to a medium speed, and I'm going to slowly add my sugar. So my sugar, we've got about 75 grams of sugar here, and when you're doing a meringue, it's very important to be patient with your sugar because the meringue is very light and the sugar is very heavy. So if you throw all that heavy sugar into the meringue is going to collapse. Okay, it's a bit dramatic of me, but the meringue is going to fall down. So we just want to tap it in slowly. Okay, boom. That's enough. Just about a tablespoon. Let it whisk. Wait. And then we'll start adding some more.
Got an interesting question about the meringue. How would we achieve this without a mixture? Is there a certain technique if you're going to do it by hand?
If you're doing it by hand, you're just looking for the same thing. So you're just whisking constantly until you have small air bubbles, and then you're slowly adding your sugar in. So you just got to imagine what this mixer is. It's like an automatic hand. So if you just had a big bowl, make sure you use a big bowl. Whisk. If you can get someone else to tip the sugar in, that'll be really good because your arms are going to be tired. So whisk. Slowly pour the sugar, constantly whisking, and you'll be able to achieve the same result. It's just going to take you a little bit longer, and you're going to be very tired. We've got a lot of things to make, so you don't want to be too tired. So I'm slowly adding the sugar. We want the sugar to really dissolve into the meringue, and you can see the texture changing. The texture's getting very light, it's getting very thick, it's getting bubbly. And I'm just slowly adding that sugar in, just until it's all incorporated. And at this point you can start to really kick up the speed, because we're not too worried about forming the small bubbles. We did that in the beginning. So just kick up the speed. I'm going to add my final part of sugar, And now I've added all my sugar, so it's all gone. And you can see it's probably like a soft peak right now, but we're going to whisk it until we have a stiff peak. It should look very glossy. And there's one thing that I'm contemplating doing with this. So whenever you make a meringue, you want to reach a stiff peak with this. And a very classic technique is to tip the bowl over your head. This is a risk, guys, because if I tip...
They're asking for it.
They're asking for it. I don't think they are. I think we should do it. I think we should try and tip the bowl over our head. And we're going to switch to a spatula. This one. I've got my 3 spatulas laid out. I only own 3 spatulas, so I was running short. And we're gonna fold the mixture through the batter here. Let's have a little check on this. What I wanted to also say is the melted butter is done, so I just turned it off. I'll show you quickly. So have a look, our butter is melted nicely. Okay, so we're just going to set that to one side quickly. That pan is really hot. You should have picked that up with a glove. And let's have a little quick look at this meringue. It might still be a little bit too soft. Let's have a look. Okay, too soft. If I tip that, it's going to drop on my head. So have a look at this. So if I lift it up, can you see how soft it is? That's too soft. That won't work. So we're going to keep whisking it up. I'm going to increase the speed. I'm interested to hear how are these votes going. Am I going to tip this on my head? So have a look at this texture now. Oh, here we go. Ooh. Look at that peak. Okay? You see that peak? And look at how much the colour of it's changes. It's very glossy. It's very thick. And we're going to do it, okay? So you should have stiff peaks to your meringue. So stiff that you can tip it over your head. Do it 2 times. Do it 3 times.
Got it.
You've got to trust yourself. You've got to have faith. So we've got a meringue. We've got nice stiff peaks. And we're going to fold this through. And this is a really good technique to talk about here, because what we've got, I kind of link it to going in a jacuzzi. You know when it's very cold outside? You're in a cold country and you've got a jacuzzi. Let's say you've been in the jacuzzi and you dip your toe and it's really, really hot, okay? You've got that balance of like cold and hot. Well, this is a balance of different textures. So we've got this thick almond porridge-like texture. And then what we've got here is we've got this light, airy meringue. And they're very different textures. One is thick and stodgy, one is light and airy. And we need to balance them. So if you add all that meringue in at once, this almond mixture is going to be like, whoa. This is what's going on here. I'm struggling. So we just need to introduce them slowly to each other, which is why we add the meringue in thirds. So we're going to take a scoop of that meringue. Look at it. Oof. Didn't fall on my head. It would have looked good on my head though. And we're literally going to fold it through. And I'm going to show you the folding technique very slowly. I go through the center, round the outside. Okay? Through the center, round the outside. And what you can do is, this bowl's a little bit heavy, but you can spin the bowl as well. So I'm gonna put the bowl down, I'm gonna go through the middle, I'm gonna round the outside, spinning the bowl at the same time. Through the middle, spinning the bowl. Right, so this technique of folding that is gonna very gently incorporate the meringue into the sponge mixture. And all I'm looking to do is mix that meringue just until it's pretty much disappeared. So if you have a look at that, the meringue is pretty much gone. All right, the almond batter has lightened nicely, and the textures are more consistent. And so now you've got a leg in the jacuzzi, and you're like, okay, I'm feeling it. I'm ready to go in with my full body. So we're going to add the second third of meringue into the mixture, and again we're going to use the same technique. What's really important here to remember is really scrape the bottom of the bowl, because you see this dark patch here. That's the bit of the sticky almond that hasn't quite incorporated because it's been stuck to the bottom of the bowl. So really scrape the bottom of the bowl to make sure that you get all of that mixture in there. And we're going to take the final third of meringue and we're going to do, you guessed it, the exact same technique. And by now, you should have a nice, light, airy batter. And we're going to do one more thing, which is grab that melted butter. It's the same technique, great technique for any kind of mixing.
People are loving these super clear instructions. Nice detailed explanations.
There we go. I'm trying, guys. Okay, so we've got our meringue-based Jackhammer batter, but we forgot the butter. That's the word I was trying to say. Didn't forget the butter, but the butter is the last thing to go in. And now this is Jacuzzi 2.0 here, guys, because we've got a very light, airy Jackhammer butter, and now we've got a liquidy, oily butter, and these two are not gonna mix nicely. So we need to fold it in and really incorporate it. So we're going to take that butter, we're going to pour it all in, right? And then we're just going to fold it through.
So do we need to let the butter cool down to any kind of specific temperature, or is it just a kind of...
The butter doesn't need to cool to any temperature. Honestly, by the time you've melted it and turned the heat off and your meringue is done, you fold it through, it will be warm, it will be tepid. Obviously, you don't want it at like a real rolling boil, but just warm is absolutely fine. You could melt it ahead of time. If it's too cold, it will get a little bit lumpy, so just make sure it's warm. So now, have a look at this. Can you see how the butter has split? The butter is just all over the place. It's split all over the batter. That's not good. So we're going to do the exact same technique. And this is where scraping the bottom of the bowl is really important. So just catch that on camera. You can see there's these little leaks of butter that are almost stuck. They haven't incorporated into the batter. So see that? There we go. We want to get that in there. So really work it into the batter using that spatula. Use the bottom of the spatula to scrape the bowl until you don't see any more butter streaks. Because I've made this mistake. I'm like, oh, I'm a pro baker, guys. I know what I'm doing. And I think I'll mix in all the butter. And then I pour it into my mat, and there's streaks of butter everywhere. And I'm panicking, I'm trying to pour it back into the bowl, and it's a disaster. So get it right now, really get it mixed in, and then you won't have that issue. So I'm just gonna give it a few more mixes, and that looks good. Smells amazing, you can see the little chunks of almond in there, so we're gonna get some texture when we bite into the cake. And that is the sponge done. So I'm just gonna put this down, and we're gonna move on to putting it on our mat. So we're going to talk about a couple of options here. Because I'm a baker, I have lots of equipment. Okay, I've got lots of equipment in the cupboard behind you that I wouldn't dare show you because you'd be offended as to how busy it is. But this is a sponge roll mat. So you can see that it's silicone, it's very flexible, and also it's quite thin. Can you see that kind of thin edge? And that means that when we bake the cake, we get a very nice thin layer to the cake. So we get even layers of sponge, of cremo, and then when we layer the cake, it looks really beautiful and we cut into it. If you do not have a sponge roll mat, do not panic. Because what we can do is we can take a baking tray, not this one because it's got holes in it, you don't use one that has holes in it, but use a regular baking tray, grease it with butter. You're going to place a sheet of parchment inside the cake, inside the tin, pour the batter in, spread it out, and then bake it. It's not going to be quite as clean and professional, but you'll absolutely get the job done. And so I've used a sponge roll mat, it's very lightly greased, and we're just going to simply take the batter and we're going to pour it into the sponge roll mat. Just like that. Perfect. Now if I was really concentrating on this, I would scrape out every single drop, but we're going to hurry through this. Right, let's get a spatula and we're just going to spread it out. And the great thing about a sponge roll mat is what I can do is I can get my palette knife against the lip of this sponge roll mat so that I get a very flat surface. What you don't want is uneven patches to your sponge. You want to try and get it as level as possible. So I'm literally just going to use my spatula, resting it against the edge, and I'm going to push the batter. I'm going to just spread it out, and I'll show you just at the end how smooth that edge is. So just look at that. Just look at that edge that we speak about right now that we just talked about. Very clean, very flush, and that means that when the cake does bake, we get a very flush, smooth cake that's very flat. This is going to make a tiny bit more batter than you need, but that's what we want, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the edge of this sponge mat just to push the batter off the edge like that.
What kind of size are we looking at for these silicone mats?
That's a really great question. Off the top of my head, I want to say like 30 centimeters by 25. I need to double check. If you DM me, I can definitely confirm that for you, but silicone sponge roll mats, or a sponge roll mat, pretty much are like a universal size. So if you just search for a silicone sponge roll mat, they're pretty much all the same. So you shouldn't get anything that is crazy big. Now I can spend a lot of time smoothing that out just to get it super flush, but we're not gonna waste time doing that. But can you see, we've got a pretty even layer to our sponge. It's nice and flush with the edges. And what I'm gonna do, I've got it on my hands, but I'm gonna very carefully pull it over like this onto my baking tray the second part, which is the praline cremo. So this stuff here, this is what we're going to make next. And it's delicious. It is, I have to say, one of my favourite recipes that I've ever developed. Praline, which is this lovely stuff over here, is essentially a mixture of caramel and roasted hazelnuts. So what you do is you make a caramel. So you take sugar and water to about 110 degrees Celsius, if you want to be very specific. And then you pour in your roasted hazelnuts, and you stir and you stir and you stir, and it looks awful. It starts to crystallize and it just doesn't look very good. But eventually, as you keep stirring, it will turn to this deep golden caramel. And you can pour that onto a mat, let it set, and then you put it into a blender and you blend it, and it makes the most amazing hazelnut praline paste. The smell, I know we don't have smell-o-vision yet on Instagram, but the smell is unbelievable.
So just quickly before we get into the praline,
yes.
People are asking about temperatures and times on that sponge.
So the sponge is going to bake at 205 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit, you're going to have to help me out in the comments, guys, because I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit. And it's going to take 12 to 14 minutes, okay? It should be nice and golden on top. I actually have one pre-baked, but this is what it will look like on top. That colour. Can you see that colour? I shouldn't show you that because I was going to show you earlier. I was going to show you later that I made one. But we're just going to get one other ingredient for the praline out, for the cremo, which is cream. So a cremo is essentially hazelnut praline, cream, mascarpone, and gelatin. And that is it. So I'm just going to put the cream onto a medium-low heat. We want to bring it to a gentle simmer. Okay, so just a medium heat. We want it to be simmering, we don't need it to boil. And then we're going to talk about gelatin, because I get a lot of questions about gelatin. So in here, I've got my gelatin powder and I've got water. And I'm using a platinum gelatin, which is like a top strength of gelatin. And the reason we use gelatin, you'll see it in a lot of classic French recipes or cremos, is that it helps to stabilise the mixture. So when we whip it later on, as you will see, it gives you more wiggle room, okay? Because it's not going to split, because it helps to stabilise everything. So you'll see gelatin in a lot of recipes, just a small amount, because it's going to help to stabilise the batter. Now you could try this without gelatin. I haven't used it without gelatin, but it's just not going to be quite as stable. Some people use agar as a replacement. I haven't used agar myself personally, but I'm sure there's lots of Googling that will tell you what you need to do.
So, on the gelatin, people are asking about whether they can use sheets.
Sheet.
Also.
You can use sheet gelatin. You just need to convert it. So sheet gelatin and powdered gelatin converts ever so slightly differently. So if you search on the internet for a gelatin conversion table, that's quite a lot of words, you will find a table that will tell you how to convert powdered gelatin into sheet gelatin, because sheet gelatin comes in different weights. But what essentially you would do is you would take the sheet gelatin, you would bloom it in cold water, you would squeeze out the excess gelatin, and then we would put that into the mixture and then add the hot cream on top, and the hot cream would melt the gelatin. So you can use sheet gelatin by all means. We would just need to find out what the conversion is of that. So here I've got my hazelnut praline and I've got mascarpone. So mascarpone again is going to help to stabilise this mixture. I knew I was going to splash it on myself. You know what? I actually put an apron on the side in case I did spill anything on myself and like it all went really wrong. So I've got an apron in case I spill anything on myself. You can use cream cheese if you can't get hold of mascarpone. Use full fat cream cheese. Cream cheese is a great flavour because it's going to add a bit of tang. Mascarpone is going to add a creaminess. Cream cheese is ever so slightly more tangy. But if I don't have mascarpone, I'll just swap it in with cream cheese. So we don't need to mix that about. We're going to take our gelatin, because it's already bloomed like that, we're going to melt it down. So we want to melt it down into a liquid. And then we're going to take our cream and we're going to blend it. Now you could do this with a hand whisk. This is actually quite a small bowl, so I'm thinking we could spill this, but I ran out of bowls, guys, because I used so many bowls. But what we're going to do is we're going to pour the cream into this, and we're going to grab a hand blender, and we're just going to blend this up until it forms a smooth mixture. And this really needs to set overnight, because you want that gelatin. Gelatin actually takes about 24 hours to activate or fully bloom. You want to set it overnight in the fridge, and then when you come back, your sponge is done, your cremo is done, and you can just assemble it all together. So minimum 6 hours in the fridge for this. Overnight is better. So let's go check on our cream. It's nearly there. Our gelatin is done. So my gelatin is melted, just have a look at that. So it's melted down to a liquid, just very briefly. What's key about when you're using gelatin is not to boil it, because if you boil it, it destroys the setting properties. So just put it on a low heat, or put it in the microwave and just make sure it melts down slowly. So we're going to grab our cream, which I'm hoping is hot by now. It feels nice and warm. And we're going to pour this into our praline. So can you see there's a little bit of steam coming off the pan? The cream isn't boiling, it's just steaming. And we're going to pour it over the praline. Oh, we're going to reach the top. We're going to reach the top of this bowl. Look at this. This is tight. Ooh, we just got it. And we're going to add the gelatin on top. Are you ready? This is going to explode all over you guys. We're going to add the gelatin on top, and then we're just going to blend it. And this is where the blending could blend all over me. So I'm going to put the blender underneath the surface, and I'm just going to blend it until it's combined. And just watch this change, okay? It's going to change from a very creamy mixture into something that is kind of a light brown. So I know I've mixed everything in now, and we've got this liquid, which at the moment is very runny, because we've got that hot cream. If we were trying to whip this up straight away, it just wouldn't work. So that's why we need to set it overnight in the fridge. So we're looking at 6 hours ideally. 6 hours is minimum, but overnight is better because it's going to give that cremo more time to set up in the fridge. It's done. So when the sponge comes out of the oven, it should be very nice and golden, like this. And I've just flipped it over. So now I've got the kind of blonde side. So this is the face of the cake that was on the mat, and this is the top that was facing the oven. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that at the bottom, we're going to use this as the top. And we're going to layer it with our praline cremo, which I have already made. So I'm just going to go grab one out of the fridge very quickly. So this has been in the fridge for about 24 hours. So just have a look at that consistency. It looks absolutely amazing.
How long would that keep for?
So that's
something
gonna,
like this.
That's going to stay, it's basically as long as the cream is still in date. So if your cream's in date for a week, it's still going to last. You know, praline's going to last a long time. So I would keep that probably for like 4 or 5 days. It's got to be well covered, because if it gets any air spots in it, it's going to start to harden ever so slightly. But now, we've got this beautiful, look at this mixture. It's much thicker, it's creamier in consistency. It's just, I could take a spoon and I could dip right into it. But we're going to take about half of that, and we're going to whisk it up to a soft peak, and we're going to pour it and spread it onto our cake. So I'm just going to add about half of that cremo. And this is more than your batch will make. I just made extra in case anything was horribly wrong for me, guys. I just made a little bit extra. But we're going to put that in there. And then we're going to whisk this. So I'm going to whisk this until it forms a medium peak. So you want to make sure you don't over whisk this, because it's got the gelatin in there. It should stabilise nicely. So it shouldn't over whisk, but always keep an eye on it. You know, this isn't the time where you go, right, I'm going to go put something on Instagram. I'm going to go, you know, read a book. Keep an eye on it, because you don't want it to split. So we're just going to whisk that up. And saying that, I'm going to run and quickly put this in the fridge. So you watch it for me, guys. It will whip up just like cream, because it's got cream in there, but it's not going to over whip or go as grainy, because we've used the gelatin to stabilise it. It's not going to go grainy. You know when you whip cream and if you keep whipping for too long, it splits and it's a disaster. Because we've stabilised it with gelatin and we've stabilised it with mascarpone cheese, when we whisk it, it gives us more wiggle room not to over whip. Anything that has cream in will eventually over whip, but because we've added that stabiliser, it shouldn't over whip. So have a look at this. I mean, just look at this, just flows off the whisk. I'm going to take it a little bit further, but you can see it's really thickening up. The smell, you can hear it, even behind the camera. It's like, oh yeah, this smells good.
Yep.
So I'm just going to keep an eye on it, because the worst thing is that you overwhip it. It's always scary to overwhip something. The same with the whipped ganache. You know, whipped ganache you're going to leave overnight. I know Dominique Ansel, when he made his meal cake, he made it filled it with this beautiful vanilla whipped ganache, which he chilled overnight. Okay, there we go. So now I've got a nice kind of medium stiff peak. What's a stiff peak? What am I talking about? Medium. It's a medium peak. So we're going to tap that out, and we're just going to use this to layer our cake. So I'm going to take my cooled sponge, just nice and cool. I'm going to take my cremo, and I'm going to put the cremo onto the cake. Now what I will say is don't worry about the edges, because we're going to cut this, we're going to cut it into a really nice shape. So if you're worried about getting it perfectly to the edges, don't panic. You'll see mine won't touch the edges at all, so don't worry about that. I'm going to get a trusty palette knife, and we're going to just spread this about. Okay, so I'm going to take my palette knife, we're going to spread that out. I'm going to get a really nice spread on the cremo, trying to get it as level as possible. So I'll show you in a second what the cake looks like once we spread it out, but we should get, if you just steady yourself, you should be able to get a nice even layer to your cremo. And don't worry too much if you've got little lumps or bumps, or there's a couple marks where I've knocked it with the spatula. Don't worry about that, because we're going to cover this up and we're going to layer it. So what we've got now is a very even layer of cremo, and you can see when I lift this up, so this is the finished dish, this is what we're making, you can see that very even layer of cremo, and that's just from, this is the stage where we're layering it and making it really nice and even. So it's very important that you get it even at this stage, because we're not going to have another opportunity to get it nice and even. What we're going to do now is, okay, so this is a very fancy tool. You don't have to use this tool, but I just happen to have this tool. What you would use is a knife and a ruler, but this is called, there's a big one, a multi-wheel pastry cutter. Oh, that was a mouthful. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut it into 3 even strips. Because this cake is layered, you see we've got 6 layers. We've got sponge, cremo, sponge, cremo, sponge, cremo. 6 layers in this. So we cut this into 3, and then when we stack them on top of each other, we are left with 6 layers. So I'm just going to measure this very roughly into 3 even pieces. But like I said, you could use a ruler and a knife and it'd be absolutely fine. I'm going to just go like this. It's one of the most satisfying tools. I mean, how satisfying is that? That was good. And what we're going to do is we are going to use a palette knife again, and we're just going to stack these on top of each other. If your cremo, let's say you haven't whisked it up quite enough, let's just say it's a little bit runny, what I would say is put this in the freezer before you cut it. Put it in the freezer for 15-20 minutes, and then it will firm up and it will make it much easier to stack. So if you have underwhipped your cremo ever so slightly, just put it in the freezer once you've laid it onto your sponge, and then you can work with it. So we've lifted up a strip, and can you see? Very even layer of sponge and cremo. And what we're going to do is we're going to layer this on top, like that. And then we're going to take the third and final piece, and we're going to lift that
just
up.
Appreciate that line up there.
Look at that. Like that. Alright? So at the moment it looks a little bit ugly, there's some edges. Don't worry, because we're going to trim it all later on. And I've got another sneaky swap in for you guys. We're going to put this into the freezer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze it until it's nice and firm. Depends on your freezer temperature, it might take 20 minutes, it might take an hour, so just keep an eye on it. But what I want this to be firm to the touch, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to cut it into strips. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in the freezer, and we're going to grab, so I've got one that is set. So you see if I touch this now, completely dry to my finger. Nothing is coming off. And I'm going to take a palette knife. I'm just going to very quickly flip it over, like that. And we should have a nice, I tidied this one up just before I came on camera because I could. So your edges might be a little bit rougher than mine, but you can tidy those up. And now a great technique is to cut the cake. So we're going to cut the cake into finger shapes. So you can see these finger shapes here. This is going to make about 4 to 5 cakes, depending on how many you cut. But we want nice, even finger shapes. So again, I'm going to use this because I can. I would take a ruler, if you're being really precise, I would measure exact width, so they're each the same, about 1.5 inches. You could also cut it by freehand. That's absolutely fine. But I'm going to use this multi-wheel pastry cutter, and I'm just going to mark to pastry. Right, this just gives me 5 little lines along the pastry, just tiny little scores that I can then use my hot knife to cut the pastry. So I'm going to use a blowtorch. I've had this blowtorch for a long time, and sometimes it just doesn't turn on. So we'll see. Hey, there we go. Doesn't take too long. I'm going to take a knife. Great pastry chef's technique to heat the knife. So we run the knife along a blowtorch. If you don't have a blowtorch or you don't have a gas hob, just dip it in hot water, boiling hot water, and then dry the knife. And then we're going to take this knife and I lost my mark, there's my mark. And we're going to cut a nice, even finger. Like that. Now if I lift this up, you should see, well, it's a lovely finger. Look at this edge. Look at how clean that is. By using the hot knife, you get a very clean edge to your sponge. Very even layers, and that's exactly what we want. So just a quick note on this. Every time I'm cutting the cake, I'm cleaning the knife and I'm reheating it. Very important, because if you cut the cake and then you move and you cut the second cake, all the slightly melted cremo is going to drag along the side of the cake as you're cutting it, which is going to leave you with a slightly impure cut. It doesn't really matter at all. It's just from a presentation standpoint, that is what I want to do. So I've got 5 beautiful fingers of cake that are pretty even. This one was a little bit wider than the others, but we're going to ignore that. And we're going to put those back in the freezer. They're pretty cold already, so I could probably work with them now, but I've got some more in the freezer that we're going to use. But we want them to be very cold for the next stage, which is the chocolate coating. So we're going to just move on to the final stage here, which is the chocolate coating on the outside. So I'm going to pop this guy in the freezer. I'm going to get on with the chocolate coating very quickly.
How long are we sticking that in for, Matt?
So we're going to say 15, again, depends on your freezer, I would say like 15 to 20 minutes. If you've chilled it for enough time beforehand, it will already be pretty firm. What we don't want is a very soft sponge when we dip it into our chocolate filling, because if the sponge is too soft, it will actually fall off the knife. So it's better to really freeze the cake, make sure it's really solid, and then dip it in the cake, rather than having a very soft sponge and trying to dip it in the cake. Then you'll be in a little bit of trouble. So the final element is the chocolate coating, and we're not going to do any chocolate tempering, none of that difficult stuff. We're going to do a cheats. We're going to call it a cheats chocolate tempering. It's not chocolate tempering at all, but it's this lovely coating that we use on the outside here, which is filled with almonds, but you could also use hazelnuts. And why I call it cheats tempering is that it gives a nice coating to the cake, but we're going to add a little secret ingredient, which I will tell you now. So we're going to add a little bit of oil. So I've got 10% of the weight of chocolate in oil. So I've got about 300 grams of chocolate here. You could do more chocolate, it's absolutely fine. And I've got 10% of that weight in oil. So I'm using vegetable oil, any neutral oil. You could also use olive oil if that's the only thing you've got in the house. Olive oil works very well with chocolate. We're going to pour that onto the chocolate mixture. And we're going to put that over a bain-marie. So bain-marie, more French guys, so you see my French, but essentially what it is a pan. I'm just going to put the heat on. It's a pan with just a little bit of water in the bottom. Okay, just a little bit, an inch of water. We're going to put that on the heat, along with the chocolate. You're going to have to remind me to keep an eye on it, because if we burn it, we're in a little bit of trouble. But we're going to heat the oil and the chocolate first, then we're going to take it off the heat, and we're going to add our nuts. So I've got chopped almonds here. Like I said though, you could use any kind of chopped nut. Also, you don't have to use nuts, so you could just leave the nuts out. Or you could put a bit of fouilletine in there. You could put, what else is crunchy that goes in there? Something else crunchy that goes in. You could stir that through the mixture.
Some questions about the oil.
Oil, there we go.
So, people asking, can you use coconut oil?
Yes.
Would that alter the flavour too much? Would
Again,
that
you're going
add
to get
something
a little bit of coconut, but the reason for the oil, I'll explain that, is that oil will soften it. So if you just use melted chocolate, when you cut the pastry, that chocolate is going to snap ever so slightly, and because it's a chilled pastry, it's not the most enjoyable eating experience. So by adding just a little bit of oil, coconut oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, it softens the chocolate. So when we cut it, it cuts cleanly and softly, and it means that it's easier when you're eating it. It's good from a texture standpoint.
What about butter? This is popping up. Butter.
You know, I haven't tried it with butter, because the butter's kind of like a ganache. If you're going to add butter in, it's almost like a ganache.
Would it go too soft?
I wouldn't go butter. You could, I mean, what's the worst that can happen? It's still going to taste good. So what I would say, what's the worst that's going to happen? If you add some butter, it will probably be fine. And nothing's really going to go wrong. It's still going to taste good. So go with butter. If that's all you've got, that is absolutely fine. Oh, I just flicked my dessert. So what we're also going to do is we're going to make a second batch of praline cremo, which we're going to whisk up, and we're going to add that into a piping bag. So this is the nozzle that I'm going to use to decorate, which created this kind of swirly pattern on top. This is like an open star tip nozzle. Any decoration though for this cake is going to work. So if you don't want to do the swirly line on top, or you're not confident with piping, spoon the cremo on top and use a palette knife and wipe it around, or use a round tip nozzle and pipe little dollops. Get creative with your design. It does not have to be that. That was just something I practiced and I felt looked good. So you can do absolutely anything. We're going to check on our chocolate just to make sure it's moving. It should melt relatively quickly, and we're going to let it cool to about 45 degrees C. You don't have to be specific. I've got a thermometer here which I use. If you do not have a thermometer, don't worry. Once it's essentially melted, but there's a few bits of chocolate, stir it through, take it off the heat, and if you let it cool for 3 to 4 minutes, it will be at temperature. If you dip your finger in, it should be a little bit warmer than body temperature. The reason we want it at about 45 degrees Celsius, if you can get it there, is that you've got to remember we've frozen the cake. So the cakes are at -4 degrees Celsius. And so when we put that cold block, it's almost like a block of ice, into the warm chocolate, it's going to pull the temperature of the chocolate down. So if the chocolate is too cold and you put an ice block into it, it's just going to start to solidify and get very difficult to dip. So you want the chocolate to be slightly warmer than colder, so that it's easy to dip and it kind of runs off the cake and we get a nice, even, thin coating around the outside. So the temperature is kind of important if you do have a thermometer. Right, let's go back and have another little look at it. The other key point to remember is the dunking vessel, as I'm going to call it, the dunking vessel. And this here is my lunchbox. I know this is not the most beautiful thing ever, but it is a fantastic dunking vessel. And when I say dunking vessel, what we're going to do is we're going to take the cake and we're going to dunk it into the melted chocolate. If you use a really wide, shallow bowl, you're only going to have a very thin layer of melted chocolate. If you use something that is very tall but narrow, you're going to get a nice deep pool of chocolate to dunk your cake into. So make sure you use a Tupperware or something that is very small but tall and big enough to fit your cake in. So this is another really key point to make sure that you've got that done. Right, let's check our chocolate.
Does it matter the kind of chocolate you're using? Could it be milk, dark, white?
That's a great question. You could do this any chocolate. I would just think about the flavours. So milk chocolate's going to work here, dark chocolate's going to work here. It's the same ratio, so 10% oil to the amount of chocolate. I think white chocolate maybe is too sweet for this recipe because the praline cremo has quite a lot of sugar in it from the caramel. It maybe wouldn't work from the matching the flavours, but if you're using another recipe, it would work perfectly. So you can use the same technique of 10% oil and to your chocolate with milk, dark or white. It would look great. So great question, it's a fantastic question. Okay, we're nearly there. I'm going to take this off the heat, and last time I forgot to wear a glove, so I'm just going to grab a towel so I don't burn myself. Here we go. Right, so you can see, I'll show you this. See how there's a few little chocolate chunks still in there? I know this is quite hot, so by keeping a few chocolate chunks in there and stirring it through, what I'm essentially doing is they kind of act like mini ice cubes, and they're going to pull the temperature down as they cool, as they melt, sorry. So that's just a quick way, a quick trick to helping to cool your chocolate quicker, is to make sure you don't melt it completely. Right, we're going to get our nuts. The amount of nuts you use doesn't matter. Okay, if you want it to be very nutty coating, you could double the amount of nuts. I kind of play it by ear sometimes, so start with about 50 grams of nuts. Put those in, or I just use them all. I said start with 50 grams, so just put them all in. Anyways, that's fine. I'm going to go for extra nutty coating today and just stir those through. And I always find that it's better if you stir the nuts in afterwards rather than melting them with the chocolate. So I'll just make sure you do that at the end. And then if you lift it up, you should see on your spatula, you're already seeing that coating that you're going to get with the chunks of nuts. And it's just going to give the cake a really nice texture. Another great little trick, something that I used to always make the mistake of, I didn't quite understand when I was working with chocolate, is chocolate and water do not go well together, okay? If you get a little bit of water in your chocolate, it's game over. And obviously we've been melting that chocolate over a pan of water, so there's steam, okay? There's steam, there's condensation on the bottom of the bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tea towel, I'm going to dry the bowl. Because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pour the chocolate into my dipping vessel. And if I've still got condensation or water on there, as I pour, all that water will tip into the chocolate and it will start to seize the chocolate. So always dry your bowl after you've melted the chocolate. And we're going to pour it into our dipping vessel.
Lots of love for your lunchbox.
Lots of love for the lunchbox. This has been in a lot of videos. I've used it for a lot of dipping videos. My wife will say, like, where's the lunchbox? Like, I need to take something to work. Oh, sorry, I'm dipping. It's no longer a lunchbox. It is a full-time dipping vessel. That's what I'm going to call it.
With regard to the dipping, lots of people asking, could they pour the chocolate over these if they haven't got a vessel?
So you could pour the chocolate. One thing about pouring chocolate is because the cakes are cold, the chocolate will set in different parts depending on the temperature of the cake. So what you'll be left with, as you'll see on the side of the cakes, we've got a very clean finish, okay? So there's no drip marks, there's a very even layer of chocolate around the outside. If you pour the chocolate, which you by all means you can, what will happen is different parts of the chocolate will set at different times and you end up with drip marks, okay? So you'll end up with drip marks that have set on the outside of the cake. Totally possible, you can absolutely do it, it's just from an aesthetic, it looks better if you dip it. So we're going to check the temperature very quickly because I can. Ooh, we're a little bit cooler, we're at like 40 degrees. So we're going to work pretty quickly, actually. And I've just brought another mat out because what we're going to do actually is we're going to start to drag these cakes, which I'll show you in a second. Let me pull these cakes out of the freezer, which are really nice and frozen. So I'm going to show you now. So I can lift them up, okay, so I can work with them. And you'll notice that the praline is on the bottom and the cake is on the top. We want the praline on the bottom because we're going to seal that with chocolate. So I like the finish to be the brown golden cake on top. So that's just the way I prefer to serve. So we're going to take a knife and we are going to stick it in the cake. And you can see it's frozen. Like I could do anything with this cake. It's going to stay on the knife. If this isn't cold enough, it will fly straight off. It will fly off. But now it's like a sausage. You know, it's just like on a skewer. So we're going to take our cake and we're going to dunk it. This is the money shot, all right? We're going to get several angles of this. So we're going to dunk, and make sure you want to coat all the sides. Oh yeah.
This would be my downfall. This is it right now. And
then we're going to tap off, we're going to let it drip. Let it drip, let it drip, let it drip. And then we're going to move over here and we're going to drag the cake, okay? And you're wondering, why are you dragging the cake? So can you see here some of the nuts are coming off the bottom? If you've got really big chunks of nuts on the bottom of the cake, what basically happens is once you go to let the cake set, those nuts will cause an imbalance, so your cake will be slightly off balance because of the nuts that are stuck underneath. By dragging it on the bottom, what we're doing is we're flattening the surface of the cake so that when we go to present it and we serve it, it stays nice and flat. So we're going to dunk some more, so I'm going to go over. I'm going to dip my cake. And we're just going to go in. Let me get a close up here. Here we go. You can just see that chocolate coating it really nice. And you can see what I mean by this dunking vessel. Because it's quite deep and quite shallow, it gives us the ability to coat the cake very easily. I'm going to tap off the excess. And then we're going to move over. And you can see we've got a massive, massive nut there, which we don't want because it's going to cause an imbalance. So we're going to go over, we're going to drag, until it feels nice and smooth. There we go, look, I've got rid of that big nut. And then we put the cake there. And if you have a look at this cake already, see how that chocolate's already setting? Because the cake is so cold and our chocolate is at the right temperature, that cake is already setting up really nicely. So that chocolate is set really nicely along the outside. We're going to dunk one more, because well, I've got 4, but we're going to dunk one more. So we'll just go straight up for this one. We're going to dunk. And I'm working pretty quickly. And if at this point your chocolate is starting to set or harden, just put it in the microwave or pop it back on the hob and you can bring it back up to temperature. And you can also store this for a couple of days. If you want to store this in the fridge, you can then reheat it, melt it, and you can use it to dip again another day. So we've got a really nice coating. We're going to drag, and then we're going to let it sit. Okay, we're making pretty good progress, guys. So we've got our cakes are dunked, we've got them nice and layered, and all we've got to do now is we're going to decorate them. So I'm going to grab a serving plate very quickly, and we're going to start to decorate. This is the piping. I always feel a bit of pressure when I'm piping, but hopefully we'll get it right. I'm just going to set it to one side very quickly, and we're going to get the rest of our cremo out. I'm going to take the rest of my praline cremo. I'm just going to grab out the fridge. Okay, so whisk this up. Again, I'm going to keep a very close eye on it because I don't want to over whisk it. I don't want to ruin it. So we're going to whisk that until we've got a soft peak. And we've got our piping bag, which is fitted with our round tip nozzle. And a great little tip, I'll just slow this down a little bit. When you're filling a piping bag, if you try and hold it with one hand and you try and scoop with the other, it's very difficult because it can start pouring out the bottom. So a great technique is to twist the bag, okay, to create a knot, place the bag into a tall jug, fold the sides down, and then you can just pour the mixture into there, and it makes the whole process really a lot easier. So it's just a great little tip, rather than when you're rushing around and you're trying to pour it in there, it can get a little bit stressful. Right, we're nearly there.
A little question about the sponge earlier.
Yes.
And the mat.
Yes.
Is there any need to grease the silicone?
Yes.
Or do you just grease if you're using a baking tray?
Definitely grease the silicone. Sometimes the silicone doesn't stick, but I always add just a thin greasing of butter. Or if you've got like a spray oil, you could use that. But I always do, yeah. Because the worst thing is you make that sponge, and you're so happy, and then you go to take it out and it sticks and it rips. So yeah, always grease it ever so slightly. So now again, we've got a nice soft peak, and you can see it looks a little bit chunky, and that's the notes of the praline, the chunkiness of the praline in there. It looks good. So I've got 3 to practice on. And the great thing about this is if I don't do a great job, we've got 3 that are beautiful here. So I'm going to take where is my other spatula? We're going to use a wooden spoon. So I'm going to grab a spoon and we're going to spoon this into our piping bag. There we go. Lift it up, move the bag away, unravel the knot, and all the filling is in there. One final tip, while we're talking about piping bag tips, is there's a few air bubbles in here right now. So whenever you're making macarons or piping buttercream, just flatten the mixture, press it up the bag, and that will get rid of any air bubbles. Then, when you squeeze it back down, you've got absolutely no air bubbles. And there's nothing worse than piping, and you go, and it pops and it ruins your piping. You need to be able to do it in one consistent flow. Right, we're going to wrap this guy up. We're going to lift one of the, I forgot one of the techniques. So what we're going to do very quickly, which I forgot to show you, is I'm just going to cut the ends off of the cake. So I'm going to lift this over here. I'm going to take my knife, just very quickly cut the ends off. And then, when it comes to presenting the cake, you can see I've got a very nice clean edge to present to my guests. You could do this with a hot knife. I'm kind of ploughing through it with a cold knife because it's really nice and sharp, but just slicing the end off gives you a lovely little way to present the cake. It's almost telling your guests what's inside it. So we're just going to work on these 2, and I'm going to cut final one either side. It is better to do it with a hot knife. I'm risking it a little bit by doing it with a cold knife. Here we go. And now it's time for the piping. Are you ready, guys? So we're going to pipe in a spiral motion, right? And then we're going to whip off at the end. And if it doesn't go well, don't worry about it. Okay, it's still going to taste delicious. You've still got the praline cremo. It's not all about the looks. So we're going to start. I'm going to apply even pressure. We're going to squeeze and spiral and spiral and spiral and spiral and whip. And then if I just pull this around to show you, that front end is just really beautiful. Okay, it's got a really nice spiral, got great texture to the cremo, and then I'm going to rattle through the other ones. Once you've got one, you're feeling confident, guys. You're feeling confident. So again, it's just Boom. It's like I've done it before. So we're going to do one more, and then we're going to finish it with a little bit of gold leaf. But like I said, you can do any design that you want, okay? If you don't want to do that design, do something else. You can get very creative with it all. So we're going to finish it with just a little bit of edible gold leaf. You do not have to use edible gold leaf. And we're just going to start our coffee because we need to have this with a coffee. So I'm going to throw a Pecan Biscotti capsule because it's going to go so well with this. It takes about a minute to brew, so I'm going to put it into our machine. And we're going to let that do its thing. And I'm going to get my gold leaf out. We're going to use some tweezers. If anybody knows me, you know I love a tweezer, guys. So I get my tweezers. I'm going to take a little bit of gold leaf. And I'm just going to dust the top. Dust? Probably not the right word. Dust is not the right word. I'm going to garnish the top very beautifully with a little bit of gold leaf. Just like that. I'm going to do one more on there. What do we think, guys? What do we think? So these are the orange and almond praline cremo cakes. They're going to work perfectly with our Pecan Biscotti capsule, which is brewing imminently in the background. I'm going to take a bite. I've got 6 to choose from. Look at that. I'm going to grab myself a little fork. You can see our coffee brewing, the beautiful crema that we're getting on. Love it. We're going to do a little cut so that you can see the center. We're going to eat it. We're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a great time. Let me get a little knife. Look at that. Look at that. That is just the front end there. Looks beautiful. Coffee is brewing. It's a big fork. It's a big fork. I feel like I should go for something a bit smaller, a bit daintier. Anyways. Now you can obviously take this capsule with a little bit of milk if you want. I love it black. When I'm having coffee at night, I want to have a nice black, intense coffee. Just have a look at this crema, guys. I love having the virtual machine and the ability to show my friends like professional quality coffee. It smells amazing. It smells festive. You can smell the biscotti. It's sweet. Oh, it's that marzipan flavour. I just love it. I love that they come out with these festive editions. Usually I have a little bit of sugar. Well, I'm not going to have sugar in it today because I've got this lovely cake that we're going to dive into. We'll take a bite of one. Oh, and it just... See how easily it cuts? We talk about adding the oil into the chocolate. It just cuts really easily. Yeah. Oh, and the crunch you get from the chocolate and almond coating. You get a little hint of citrus from the orange zest that's in the Jackhammer Sponge. And then this very creamy, luscious, decadent praline cremo. If you make this, I'm excited for you because your friends and family are going to be like, whoa, where did you learn this? And then you serve it with the coffee. You're done. You've got Christmas sorted, guys. You don't need turkey, you don't need chicken, just give them the orange and almond layer cake with praline cremo and a biscotti coffee. Done, guys. So, here is the finished creation. This is an almond and orange layer cake with praline cremo, a chocolate coating, and almonds on the outside, and it pairs perfectly with the Pecan Biscotti Festive Nespresso capsule. And the great thing about this, if you have made this recipe, you can get the full recipe on Nespresso.com, so check it out. The full written recipe is going to be on there. You can also get featured by Nespresso on their Instagram account if you tag hashtag Nespresso Editions and tag @Nespresso, and they're going to feature the best ones if you guys make it. I'm really excited for you to make it. It is a luscious, decadent cake, perfect with that Pecan Biscotti capsule. And if you've got any questions, just send me a message. I'll be happy to help. Very excited to see your creations. Have an amazing festive holiday break with your family and friends. I know it's going to be a little bit different this year, but little bakes like this are going to bring joy to the occasion, bring something different, something you can share with your friends and family at home. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you soon for more Nespresso Edition.